Welcome to the Humble Hoof podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Equithrive. This one goes out to all the horses with the crusty necks, fleshy backs, and girthy middles. The horses who gain a few extra pounds simply by breathing air. The easy keepers on limited pastures. The folks at Equithrive know there is nothing easy about easy keepers. That's why they have formulated products just for you. Equithrive's Metaborol is a pelleted supplement that is scientifically proven to support healthy metabolic function and a healthy inflammatory response in horses. It's bona fide joint and metabolic support, all in one easy-to-feed pellet. Visit equithrive.com today and use the promo code HUMBLEHOOF to get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping. www.equithrive.com. For the last 10 years, as my interest in track systems for horses has grown, I've followed countless track system boarding facilities and liveries on Facebook from all over the world. One of them that really caught my eye was Abbotts View Track Livery, which is owned and run by Amy DellAnthony. And something that was really cool was last year when I noticed that Amy actually had written and published a book all about how to set up and run track systems for horses. I was super excited about it because I was opening my own track system boarding facility and I could take all the ideas and help I could get. So I bought her book, read it cover to cover, was absolutely obsessed with it. You can get it on Amazon, by the way. And I reached out to Amy to see if she would chat with me a little bit about track systems, how to start them, how to get things going, some practical ideas for it, what it's good for, and to sort of talk about how her passions came to be. So I thought we could just start with how you became interested in track systems and, you know, what kind of led you to having your own Abbotts View track livery.
So, I mean, what led me to tracks was my horse in particular. I'd always had, before I had Buck, who is my horse now, he's a rescue cob and they're known in the UK, we call them good doers, which means he doesn't need to eat much to maintain his weight. And it gives you kind of the false pretense that they're going to be easy to look after, and they're not. Yeah. You're actually better off having what we call poor doers and feeding them up in terms of like the grass and stuff that we have in the UK and many other countries. It's just too high in sugar and stuff, as you know. So when I got him, I was constantly battling with his weight. He was only 2 when I got him. And obviously I was not going to back him until he was 5 or 6 because I wanted him to be fully mature. So exercising wasn't an issue other than like in-hand work and stuff, you know, and there's only so much you can do on foot with a young horse, especially. I tried muzzling him, but then he was miserable. Like he would just run over neighing at me and I felt awful. And I was essentially starving him because I didn't know that you weren't supposed to do that. I just thought, well, you know, I'm just restricting how much he can eat, but actually he just wasn't getting enough, which, you know, in the long term made him fatter because all his stress hormones kicked in. But I can't remember how exactly I discovered track systems. I think somebody bought me Jamie Jackson's Paddock Paradise book, which kind of like started the cogs turning. Yeah, my mum bought it for me. And I kind of read it and was like, this makes sense. But it was kind of a bit too on the natural side for me in terms of like, it was very much, you know, like they play cougar noises on the track and things like that. And they say, don't go onto the track because it's the horse's sacred space and things like that. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can sort of tone that down a bit and make it something that works sort of in a domesticated environment. So I set up 1 acre track for my horse and some Shetland ponies and instantly saw the difference. And the way that I came to it as a business was I've always been really like driven, business minded. I knew I wanted to run my own business and I had this whole business plan for a normal yard. You know, I'd had it drawn out. I had stables, had like in a beautiful U shape with a menage in the middle. And then I was like, I'm going to go to a track. I then thought, but what if no one wants to come? If, like, I can't just build this big track. It's really new, and like, I mean, I live literally right next door to a traditional livery, and she thinks I'm mad. Even putting my horses on a little acre, she was like, "What are you doing? They need grass," So I just started up really, really small and sort of tested the water really, rather than investing it all, building it all like I was going to originally do with a big bank loan, because I thought, well, I'll be able to fill a normal yard pretty easily, but my heart just wasn't in it. So yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think a lot of people listening know what a track is because I tend to talk about it quite a bit, but can you kind of explain for those who might not know, like, what does a track system entail and, why is it set up the way it is?
So, I mean, the most basic track you can possibly get is if you just think of, or take the paddock that your horse is currently in, and you just make a fence around the outline of it, like another fence on the inside. So you create a track, around a paddock, around your farm, wherever you want it. It can be small, it can be big. And the idea is that, if they were in that same paddock that the track's built around, they just mooch about in the middle, don't they? Eating grass, grazing really slowly. But when you build a track and you put resources around it, so your water, your hay, your shelter, and you spread it out, the horses are motivated to be moving in between those. And they move more. It restricts the amount of grass they can eat because, you've only got a certain part of your paddock fenced. And then over time, you can add different surfaces and things onto the track that stimulate the horses' hooves in a way that they would naturally be stimulated if they lived in the wild. So it's just trying to mimic how a horse would naturally live in a domesticated world as best as we can. Obviously, tracks aren't natural. Hay nets aren't natural. Fencing isn't natural, but we've got to think of the picture of this is the best we can do to give them what they're supposed to get, basically.
Right. Yeah. And most places in my area, and I think it's probably similar where you are, traditionally kept horses, they'll like go out during the day in a square paddock of whatever size, stand in one spot to eat and then one spot to drink, maybe move around and play a little bit with friends and then go inside at night. And I've had clients that have tracked their horse's movement, like put a little pedometer on their horse and found that they moved, like even in that kind of environment, like maybe like a mile or, a few miles a day. But then I had one client who put a pedometer on her horse that lives out on a track 24/7. And it was like upwards of 10 miles a day. It was like crazy, the difference. And yeah. I think that's one thing that, drew me to that is that, these horses are made to be moving, they're, I mean, just like people, like we're not supposed to be sitting all day or lying down all day. Like it's better for our joints and our muscles and our bodies. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to reiterate what you're saying, that it's, separating those resources is just so good for them.
And not just even like the physical aspect as well. I always think it's really important to mention like the digestion side of it. Like even for people, like you said, we're not supposed to sit down all the time. And if horses are still all the time, they just we think how highly likely colic is. That's because they're not moving. And if you can't move, your digestive system isn't moving basically, and things get backed up and clogged up and don't go through the body properly.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And even mental health too.
Yeah.
For the horses. Yeah.
That's a big part. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, can you tell us a little bit about some of the cases that you see come in? I mean, I feel that every horse benefits from a track, but can you give some examples of cases that you've seen really benefit?
Yeah, of course. So my kind of yard as well, the way that I run is there's a lot of rehab sort of track systems. I do have rehabs, but mine, I want horses to stay with me for the long haul, really. Especially as my horses are here, I want it to be settled numbers as much as it can be as a livery. I probably have 2 to 3 changes a year because people's lives change, circumstances change, horses get whatever for whatever reason. But I try and aim to have people that are going to stay. So the ones that I rehab as well, because I find it really hard if I rehab a horse, which I have done previously, and then it goes back to the environment it was in before, and everything just goes back. So my facility is kind of built in a way that the horses will get better and stay better because they stay in this way, or I then help their owner set up their own track at home or in whatever circumstances they are. My favourite sort of rehab cases, like obviously when I first started, I did it for my horses to control weight. And when I then started it and did more research and started having different horses, I realised that actually it helps everything because it's not just about weight management. It's that, like we said earlier, it's about the mental health aspect. One of my favourite cases actually was a thoroughbred called Oscar, who we sadly lost this year to lymphangitis. But when he came, he was quite underweight and his feet were in the process of growing a new foot. He's kind of like halfway through the process of having had his shoes off, I think, a couple of months before. And I thought, this is the first one I've had it's quite skinny. I wonder how he's going to sort of be. And he just put weight on the track, and maintained it because he was ad lib. He could choose what he ate. And I think the biggest factor was he was happy. Like mentally, you cannot get a horse. I mean, I've seen horses previously, you have your skinny little thoroughbreds and you put them in a stable with big rugs on, you give them loads and loads of food and they just don't gain weight. And the owners are like, why aren't they gaining weight? It's because they're not happy. And if you're not happy, your body physically can't be happy. And this was reinforced with another thoroughbred I had come to me in spring last year. And literally, I'd say within 3 months, she was severely underweight and she was at sort of the prime condition, up to the point a couple of weeks later, I thought, she might be getting a bit too well, which I kind of thought would never really happen on a track. But it's also important to say that, some of them need a little bit extra, so they'll come away. Same with any rehab, it depends what you're rehabbing. If you're rehabbing just body condition, they might have a few extra feeds a day as opposed to the other horses. They might have access to loose hay separate from the herd for a couple of hours a day. But again, it's about free choice. So if I separate a horse and it's like, no, I want to go back, I let them back in. But yeah, other than that, the weight gain ones have been incredible. And just watching their feet changes. So I've had a lot come with laminitis and, seeing that horse be able to walk again without being confined to a stable for months. They still have free choice to move, and it's just incredible watching the changes. It makes me very emotional.
Yeah. And honestly, I wanted to comment on what you're talking about with the weight gain and if the horse isn't happy, then their body can't be happy. And I think that just makes logical sense, because if a horse is constantly stressed, their gut isn't going to be absorbing the nutrients they're eating. They're going to have ulcers. They're going to be burning calories just through the stress of it all. I've seen horses that are just pacing back and forth or doing those stall vices because they're just so riddled with anxiety. And if you take all that away and their environment is just calm and the same, they're expecting the same thing all the time. They just know what their management is going to be like day to day, then they can take that whole stress part out of the equation and their body doesn't have to compensate for that. So yeah, I'm just kind of reiterating exactly what you're saying, that it makes sense to me,
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about it forever.
Yeah, right.
I've had people come to me that say I cannot get weight on this horse, or I can't get weight off this horse. And it's the same thing. It's the stress, you can put a horse in a stable and separate it because, people think, well, they need separate needs to the rest of my herd, so they need to be separate. But then taking them away from the herd, taking away the free choice, even if you're putting the horse in the stable to try and get it to lose weight, and you give it a really small hold hay net, a double netted hay net, whatever, they might still put on weight because their stress hormones kick in, and it just messes up the metabolic system completely, and they start piling the weight on because their body goes into starvation mode and their body thinks, we need to get weight on now, we're going to die. And again, vice versa with horses that have the opposite effect. You might shut a horse in a stable with loads and loads of hay, loads of big feeds, loads of rugs to keep them warm. But they're so stressed being in that stable, everything they eat, like you said, just doesn't get absorbed, just comes straight back out basically, and they just don't get any weight on. The biggest thing is them being out, having their own free choice and being happy in a herd and settled. That's the best thing you can do for either circumstance.
Yeah. So it's kind of taking the idea of traditional management and turning it on its head of everything that we thought we knew. We're sort of challenging that. But horses I've seen on tracks have just flourished. So, it's hard. It's almost like you have to see it,
Yeah.
And obviously, I bought your book, which is so amazing. Congratulations for publishing that. It was live on Amazon December 2022, right?
I think end of November actually.
Okay. Oh yes,
yeah,
it must have been right.
I think it was 3 days at the end of November I managed to get it out. But yeah. Pretty much.
And for those who haven't heard of it, it's Horse Track Systems. Actually, if you want to say the full name, I know there's a little subtitle.
Yeah, and the subtitle is A How-To Guide to a Healthier Horse in Body and Mind.
Yeah. And it's incredible. So it addresses so many different aspects of track systems, which, I mean, we could spend multiple episodes just talking about every aspect of track systems because there's so much that they can help. But I would love to talk a little bit about some of the practical things, or why don't you outline a few of the practical things that people might have to consider if they're thinking of setting one up?
I mean, there's a lot, but it isn't that overwhelming. A lot of people, I remember when I first started and I thought, I don't know what width to make them. I don't know how long to make it. So you have to have big areas, small areas, all of that stuff starts going through your head. But, the basics are you need safe fencing, a shelter, and you need to know where you're going to put your food sources, and everything else will come later. I mean, like I said, my first one was on an acre and all I had was a few hay boxes, natural shelter and a water trough. And even that was enough for my horse to start losing weight without any other intervention from me.
Yeah. And actually one question that I had, because, in order to maximize movement, I would separate the hay as far from the water as possible just to get them walking more. And obviously that increases, labor for the person who's managing the property if that's not convenient to just, for, a traditional boarding situation, the hay is usually next to the water, at least in my area. So you just fill up the water, toss a flake of hay over the fence, and they're right next to each other. But then that also means the horse literally can shift a few feet. Yeah. So how do you manage that at your property where the resources are separate, but is it, I mean, it probably is more labor intensive, but how do you make it easier for you as the property manager?
Yeah, I mean, it is more labor intensive and it will be for me as well because I run it, I've got 16 horses at the minute. So it's not like my little original track of 3 where I could just potter about and put hay out with a wheelbarrow. If you're going to do it on a big scale like me, you need machinery. I have a quad bike and a big trailer, and twice a day I drive out with hay nets and pop them out at different hay stations, collect the old ones in and fill them up. And so that by the time you come to the next ones out, they're all ready. We also put out big bales as well, and the hay nets we use are called Nibblies hay nets. They're like a really soft mesh, and then they're knotless, so they don't cause any damage to teeth. And the big bales we put out, we double net, but they're kind of like a backup for if the hay nets start to run low, say overnight when I'm not there. So they've always still got food. It's just they have to work a little bit harder for that once the hay nets are gone. And those I do have up sort of nearer where sort of the hay barn and the shelter is. But yeah, I mean, by putting those hay nets out twice a day that really gets them moving. And it also sparks a bit of excitement, which is silly because it's the same every day. But horses, they're like, woohoo!
Yeah, right.
It's fresh hay! It happens twice a day every day, but we're just as excited as we were this morning.
Yeah.
And they all just get moving again. If you make, I see some tracks, this isn't a criticism because I did it at the start too, where you think, to cut my labour down, I will just put big bales of hay out. But then the horses will just park at that big bale. And I mean, 5 or 6 of them can share a big bale at a time and they won't move. And it completely defeats the point. You've got to have hay in little areas spread about. And it's trial and error as well, because sometimes you get a really close-knit herd that want to be together all the time. So you have to have different hay stations with 6 hay nets for 6 horses, a herd of 6, so they all can eat together. Whereas I find that, my herds have little sort of groups within them and those horses will go off and eat together, so you can spread it out even more. But again, that depends on the herd and is a little bit of trial and error when you first take your track up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of, the constant movement with, moving from hay station to hay station, how do you, this is a question for my area. I know it's a question for your area. How do you manage the footing and prevent mud?
So in the winter, I always say to people that, you don't need to spend a fortune on loads of surfaces. Your track doesn't need to be fully surfaced. It's great if it is and you can afford it, do it. The ones that are out there that are fantastic. But I mean, me personally as well, when it came to looking at my tracks, I kind of had to make a decision whether I invested the rest of my money in better fencing or I invested it in surfacing. So I obviously chose the better fencing, but I made sure I had a really big area of hard standing up the top where the shelter is and where those big round feeders is and where the water is. So those things are together. And then in the winter, like for example, now in January here in the UK, I mean, I'm looking at my winter now and it is hammering it with rain and wind. And because it's been like that, I've told my staff this morning to just put the hay nets on hard standing. So on those days, they won't get as much movement, but I'm talking a month or two out of the whole year.
Right.
The rest of the year, the hay is out on the tracks. And you kind of don't want to pull it off the tracks too early because a little bit of mud is a good thing. It's the best way to get rid of the grass.
Right, true.
Getting the horses out on it. And I also, every year I extend my tracks surfacing a little bit more, but I don't ever want to get to the point where it's completely fully surfaced because I actually think they like rolling in mud. They go out and choose to do it. Mine have the choice where they want to eat the hay, and the hay is either on hard standings or we have loose, like at the minute when it's really wet, we'll have some loose out on the tracks. And more often than not, they go out and roll and come back on and we'll eat on the hard standing, but they still have the choice to go and roll in the mud, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And like it's very hard to pick surfaces as well. Like a lot of people struggle with it and think, well, if I put this down, it's going to be too hard for them to run on, or if I put sand down, I can't feed hay from it. So having a mixture is key as well. But I would say earth is the only thing that you can feed from, isn't too hard, absorbs impact. It just doesn't work when it's really, really wet.
Yeah.
So you have to have surfacing somewhere for the moments when it isn't working.
Right. And I've seen some people who add like obstacles around the track. Do you do anything like that?
Yeah, we have quite a few different like size logs and branches and things out on the track. But again, I'm very into free choice. So I don't set them in a way the horses have to go over them.
Right. I
have some older horses here that are arthritic, and say they're all having a gallop and they're lower in the pecking order, they might get pushed towards having to be going over it. Whereas the way that I've spread them out, they can just duck around it. Whereas the younger ones will tend to choose to jump things, which is always quite fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I've kind of debated that myself just because, getting a tractor or a UTV or something like that around them is something that's important to me. So I've seen some that they have these. Yeah, I see some people that have these really intense, like rock passages and like logs that take up the entire section. And my first thought is like, how are they getting a wheelbarrow or like a tractor around that? And I'm sure that they've figured out a way to do it. I just have to think for myself how I would practically want to, manage where I'm doing it, So.
It's the same with things like putting down sand and stuff as well. Like you've got to be really careful it's not too deep, because again, like imagine trying to drive a tractor over that with a heavy bale on the front, you might sink and spin. So everything that I've got, like the limestone, you can drive the tractor over. That's my favourite surface. But I'm going to have sandpits put in this year, and they're going to be like in a corner of the track with a gap that I can drive a tractor, quad bike. All the horses can walk through if they don't want to use it. You're right, it's really important to make sure that not just the horses, but you can get through it with all sorts. And my log features are spread out in a way I can weave through them with the quad bike. I do know one of the other track liveries, another track livery I know in the UK, had like a beautiful like rock section. And I know that she's now moved it, and she moved it and made it into a rockery instead, and hides and uses it as a forage area instead.
Oh, cool.
For that exact reason, because she just was like, I can't get my tractor over it. So I think, and actually that's one of the pictures that gets shared a lot. And every single time she's like, I don't have that anymore. But if my tractor could fly over it, then I would have it back. So, you do have to be practical when you think about these things, for sure.
Right. And I think one of the great things about tracks is that you can make it as involved or as simple as you want to. And it's very individual.
You can change it.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually why I'm starting with electric fencing, so that I can see what areas get wetter in what seasons, and just adjust the track based on the horse's usage of it. And then, maybe eventually put in more permanent fencing once I see what works best on this property. But it's something that's you're able to adapt it in so many different ways, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's one of the main things I say in my book as well, actually, is don't do lots of permanent things straight away, because you're right. Like, what if you, build a sandpit in an area that turns out to be really boggy, or that the horses decide that's their favourite toilet area, and then you've got a sandpit just being used as a loo.
Right.
I always say to have it for at least, a year of each season to see what happens and when and where you need to surface, where you can get away with not surfacing, where to situate certain things. And even now I'm still moving stuff about, and this will be my 8th year. But that's also from the terms of it makes it more interesting for the horses. So making sure I move hay locations and things like that so they don't just get set on knowing where it's going to be.
Right, exactly. A special thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Cavallo. For our Humble Hoof listeners, they are offering 20% off their Cavallo Trek hoof boots using the coupon code HRN at checkout. The Trek is the world's most popular and versatile hoof boot and Cavallo's toughest trail boot, while also doubling as an option for therapy or rehab. The front closure system makes it easily adaptable to various hoof shapes, and the TPU upper design allows for maximum strength while minimizing weight for the comfort and ease of movement for your horse. These are recommended by vets and trainers and also loved as transport boots by barrel racers, show jumpers, dressage riders, and everyone in between. Again, for 20% off a pair of Treks, use the code HRN at checkout at cavallo-inc.com. And I know obviously we talked a little bit in the beginning about how you do have a lot of permanent boarders there, and you did mention that you have some rehab cases. So I would love to talk a little bit about hoof rehab cases that you might have, obviously for a hoof podcast, either ones that you've had in the past or currently have. Is there like a specific hoof case that you can talk about?
I'm very bad at documenting the hoof ones. I don't know why. I think it's because sometimes I felt like posting hoof photos on social media can be a bit of a minefield.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So many different trimmers with so many different opinions.
Yes.
But I had one horse in particular that was a navicular case, and the owner had been told that this horse would be put down if it wasn't shod. That would never get over the navicular, and she tried everything. He'd been stabled constantly and then started to go out a little bit, and every time that he went out, it was just such a big change. His feet had just not had any stimulation at all from being inside to suddenly going out. It just looked like it was failing, when actually she started researching into sort of this way of treating navicular in terms of getting the shoes off, getting a good trimmer in that can balance them properly and also not take too much off at once. I've seen a lot of trimmers that come out and they have this image in their head of this is what the foot should look like. Yeah. So they just chop the toe off. Right. And then the horse is really, really, really lame. We actually had a trimmer come out and do that to us who was quite newly qualified. And she didn't mean to, but she'd been newly qualified. She come out, she was like, this is how the hoof is going to look, and took too much toe off. And the horse had to be in boots for about 3 months, which wasn't great. But yeah, this little horse, from having, 2 years of failed trial and error of traditional management, boots and pads, all sorts, came to mine, had his shoes off. They always quarantine for sort of 2 weeks in a pen anyway. And I was thinking, he's really not sound. I'm not sure how it's going to go. And he had to be booted for a little while, just in his fronts. And just literally, it was the track that did everything. Once he got out in that herd, his feet just changed. It was like, and you could see, again, I wish I'd photographed this foot, because you could see the changes at every single trim cycle. Yeah. He would have been a really good one if I'd really thought, I should take pictures of this. I'm getting better at that now, because, and every time my trimmer would come out, she'd be like, oh, look, this angle's slightly changed now. We can do this to get it better. Another one of my favourite ones is a Lammy case, who was actually owned by one of my staff members. And she, again, was told by a vet, you have 2 options. You can shoe this horse or you can put him down. Which is very drastic. And obviously she was working for me at the time, and she just was like, can I bring him to you? Can I try that? And I said, absolutely. He's back in full work, and he's not, I don't think he's had a day footsore since his diagnosis. And, obviously after the first initial acute laminitis attack, just through changing his diet from being, what causes the inflammation, normally high sugar, and getting him out in a herd and moving. He lived out before, so it wasn't like he was completely stable and stuff. He only started to become stable when he had the Lammy attack. But yeah, just I love those ones where people have said this horse, is at the end, and they're not. Yeah. Laminitis is not a death sentence. I don't even like, I've had horses come, I've got one now, quite an old boy called Bob, who he previously had laminitis, way before he was at mine. And he does have a degree of rotation in one of his feet that has mostly righted itself, but you can still slightly see his hoof angle is off. But he's sound and happy. And the way that the management he's on now, unless you know anything about hooves, you wouldn't notice. So, even if they've had it so badly that it's started to deform the foot, they can still come back from it and live a full life.
Yeah. And honestly, what truly devastates me is the amount of horses that are put down just because owners aren't aware of other options or aware of the fact that there is something that can be done. And that's kind of how I felt when my horse was diagnosed with navicular disease. And it's what brought me to Rockley Farm in the UK, which is what got me started on, the track system idea is, seeing these horses come in that were told that they had, a 5% prognosis of ever being sound again. And then coming back out on the other end, back in full work. And like not even just surviving, but back in full work. And obviously that's not true. It's, there's no guarantees. You're not going to have every single, you can't say that every single case will 100% be back in work and, it's all going to be rainbows and butterflies because that's not true in anything. But like the fact that there's this option that people often just don't know about. And when you're at the end of the road, because I was ready to put my horse down. When you're at that point, what do you have to lose? Either they're going to be euthanized because there's nothing else that you think you can do, or there's a chance that they can have a happy, comfortable life for many more years. Like that's what made me try it is I'm like, well, okay, I can't not try this and just, put him down. Like he's, there's just there, my heart wouldn't let me do it. So,
I'm so pleased. I'm so glad that you felt like that because I see so many go the other way.
Yeah. And he is, knock on wood, my horse since the last few years, he has been the best he has ever been, out 24/7 on I'm moving him home to my property soon, but, he's on, kind of like a track system set up. They didn't do it on purpose, but they have to go through, I know it's kind of funny. They have to go through an alleyway that is completely surfaced to get between various grazing areas. So at first I was nervous to move him there because there was access to grass. And I was like, oh, I don't know how he will be with grass, but just the fact that he has to move, from his water down through this huge, crushed stone surface alleyway down to get to the grazing area. And then he has to move through another alleyway to get to another grazing area when he's bored of that one. It was within a month or two. I was at the point where I'm going to put him down. I'm going to move him to this property and give him 6 months. I was just like, that's it. Like, I can't do this anymore because I can't see him in pain. And then 2 months later, I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't remember the last time I saw him take a lame step. Like, and that was just, it was crazy to me that just that movement and stimulating that foot and giving him the ability to just live calmly. He doesn't have any expectations. He has lots of, access to forage and friends. He's able to socialize. He just he can live like a horse. And all of a sudden, the years of me trying to fix it myself, it just made me feel like, oh my goodness, I wish I knew about this sooner. So sorry. That was my little soapbox there. I know that I'm supposed to be asking you questions, but
no, I love it. I love it. I absolutely love hearing anyone's story. This is the thing, everyone I speak to, we just end up going off on a tangent. Right. But I think the hardest part of that as well is when you have professionals telling you it's the end, because so many vets, so many trimmers, and it's not their fault. It's the way that they're trained. I worked in the veterinary industry for a short time. There is so much to cover. If you think a doctor learns about people, a vet learns about all these different animals and then goes on to train to be an equine vet. That's how it works in the UK anyway. You start off with small animal and then you go on to equine. But even then, it's so vast. There's so much to learn. And it's taught in very specific ways. So, none of the textbooks will say anything about this yet because the old-fashioned ways of shoeing, because people think they've worked because, they're a plaster and they cover up the symptoms, people think that that's still okay to use, and stabling is always recommended and shoes are always recommended. And it's education more than anything, rather than even people saying, I don't agree with it. It's just that they don't know.
Right. And it's also, like you said, it's really scary. Well, how I'm thinking, it's really scary to go against these professionals that are saying things often in absolutes.
Yeah.
And it's hard because, they do have a lot of education, and it's hard to go against professionals that are saying things that, might not be the best for the horse.
Yeah, and again, they're saying it not because it's just because they don't know that there's another option. So as far as the knowledge that they know, looking at the situation in front of them, they're like, well, if the shoes aren't fixing this and the rest isn't fixing this, then that's it. That's as far as sort of the knowledge goes. I'm really lucky with my vet. One of my vets I've got quite a good relationship with. When we first started working together, she would recommend shoes and things. I'm talking 10 years ago. And she's actually the one that's quoted on the back of my book now, because she's kind of watched my business and watched these horses and started to realise, it does work. And she will outwardly say track systems are great, and I talk about that as an option now for horses with laminitis and similar problems, which is amazing, because, having that professional say to you, you can go down this route too. Even just for this one vet and all her clients will save all of those horses potentially. So yeah, like my mission is to get more, get the word out there and get other people realizing these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to say, I have just the most amazing vets in the world who have been incredibly supportive. I know that it's hard because it's not always the case, but, no, we have a really great support system here in Massachusetts. So, and it's great. It sounds like you do too. That is a huge, huge help.
Yeah, it's massive, because I have people that will ring me for livery or for consults and stuff, and they will say, my vet has said this, and I'm like, can I speak to your vet? And it's really, really hard. And not just vets, and not just, trimmers saying their opinions, other people on your yard, when you're at a livery yard or a boarding facility, whatever you want to call it, and you're the only person there with your barefoot horse and putting it out, when everyone else's horses stays in. I mean, in the UK at the minute, when it rains like it is today, the majority of the horses won't get any turnout at all, because people don't want their fields to be trashed, and because people think the horses don't want to go out. So they just end up staying inside. And then those select few that have started to learn the other way, that will then be still putting their horses out, will get everybody else on the yard, looking down their noses at them saying, oh, you're so cruel putting your horse out in that weather. He should be inside in his bed in his pajamas, tucked up. When, that's just completely humanising the horse and not thinking about their needs at all. But people just don't see it like that. And I think feeling attacked by the people around you, I mean, for me, especially, like when I was a teenager, I would not have stood up for myself, and I would have just gone, oh, yeah, you're right, I'll bring her back in. And I think that happens a lot. People are just so sort of pressured by people around them. They don't want to make the changes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I mean, I think we could talk forever. There's so much more to discuss. And if you'd be open to it, we could do like a second episode, like a part 2. But before we wrap things up, I was wondering if you had any last minute things that you would want to mention, maybe to owners or hoof care providers that are considering looking into using a track.
Obviously I'll be really cheeky and say buy my book.
Yes, definitely.
I've written it as well because there is a niche. There isn't another book other than Paddock Paradise. There isn't a book about it being in such a domestic setup, in the way that, like I wanted it to be a step-by-step guide of how to do certain bits, and, go into the hows and whys a little, but not too much, otherwise it'd be 5 times the size that it is. Like you said about us talking now, it can go on forever. I mean, the biggest part of it as well is don't be disheartened. Don't look at all the big fancy tracks and think, well, I can't afford that. Or, I don't have that amount of land. I don't have that time. My little 1 acre track with my electric fencing with plastic posts that bent in the wind. And, that ultimately saved my horse's life. And I had that for, a year and a half before I then built a slightly bigger one and started my yard, and then bit the bullet and built the ones I've got now. It doesn't all have to happen at once, and you don't have to be intimidated by it. And also the key to these things working is management. It's not all the fancy bits that you can put into it. And if something isn't working, it's probably because you need to change something around the management of it, which, you know, does sometimes mean investing a bit more money, but it doesn't mean you have to, because when I started, I very much got into it like, oh, I need to do this and I need to do this now, and it needs to all be big and fancy and extravagant, when actually you're better off doing it step by step and letting the horses tell you what works.
Yeah, I know they're our biggest critic and they're our best judge. So
exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. And I hope that everybody goes out and buys your book. I know it's on Amazon, and I know that people in the UK can get it right from you.
Yes.
That's awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.